Hey there, I'm Gnome, and welcome to Firemaking from the Ashes, a lengthy chat about how to revitalize our old friend firemaking, a deeper dive into the nature of skills, and a study of the conflict between creating the new versus reworking the old. This is a read-through of the original document to the same name that I've just posted to the r/2007scape subreddit. This is not a commentary of said document, and therefore I'm 100% sure that there won't be any deviations from the source material due to translating written word to oral form. In fact, I'd recommend reading the document over listening to me read it aloud, as I'm a soulless and humorless machine with a soulless and humorless voice. Nonetheless, here we go. Somewhat recently, the topic of new skills exploded across the old school community. What reignited this conversation isn't absolutely clear, but the video The Fate of RuneScape by Jimmy, reference 1, undoubtedly had some influence. In it, Jimmy illustrated his desire for enticing new game expansions, a new skill being an explicit example, and his disappointment for this past year's lack of truly fresh content and focus on pre-existing features. The video left an impact on many, and, as any discussion on a future skill runs, the community approached it with the gentleness of a magnitude 7 earthquake. In turn, a popular rebuttal surfaced against the idea of a new skill. Can we rework one of our current, broken skills instead? I love the idea of new skills, especially when a member of the community puts all their passion and soul into creative and thoughtful design. Simultaneously, I don't believe in leaving older content to gather dust as we push on and on into the future. After all, that's partly why I, and many others, abandoned RS2 or RS3 for OSRS to begin with. Firemaking especially deserves some love and attention after years of neglect, but to even begin discussing a skill overhaul, we'll need to study and understand what it means for a skill to have purpose. So join me, friends, as we begin our mad descent into the realm of developing the new versus reworking the old, discovering what features drive the essence of skills, and perhaps even righting the wrongs of firemaking. Section 2. To create or to renew. A community is a fickle creature. It's hard to judge what a collective really wants at any given time because, to begin with, treating it as a singular entity will only confuse you. Its ideas will appear to dash between polar extremes, self-contradict, and battle for temporary dominance of the front page. Therefore, when it comes to deciding whether to rework old content or create something entirely new, it's difficult to appropriately divide development resources due to the many clashing yet simultaneously coexisting perspectives. On one hand, players have asked the OSRS team for years to fix old, dead content, or even bring familiar content from RS2 into old school because of fond memories. Some absolute madmen will even go out on a limb, suggesting that the team drop all new products and just focus on fixing all the broken game pieces. I hope that the updates and discourse from these past 12 months has formally debunked the myth that just reworking or reintroducing old content is good enough to maintain the game's health, as we've now had a glimpse of that reality. Soul Wars, Shades of Morton rework, Shooting Stars, the Shazian rework, Clans Overhaul, Weapon Rebalance, temporary game modes, multiple hard modes, and combat achievements. Many of these are genuinely incredible updates, particularly when it comes to building infrastructure for future long-term developments. Indeed, some of these are arguably essential updates that the game has needed for years. But they aren't new. The excitement and hope for the future that comes with novel and groundbreaking ideas hasn't really been present this year in terms of updates. Recent global events have made any population dynamic hard to understand and predict, so making any bold and sweeping claims wouldn't be smart. But one can safely say that the game isn't at its peak in terms of player enthusiasm. Conversely, I don't believe in pumping out new content and never looking back. Many of us would agree that that's what drove us away from RS3, the flagrant disrespect for the old, for the fundamentals that made our RuneScape, thrown away in a mad chase for modern appeal. I couldn't be happier to see some self-reflection on Jagex's part, even for problems the modern team didn't cause. Mod West's passion for reworking Zaya into more believable and living landscape despite its poor initial iteration being none of his doing is an excellent example of such. Similarly, I love some strong reflection over the issues that plague mining and smithing, and everyone coming to terms with the fact that it's not our current team's fault that Dragon and Barrow's equipment pretty much invalidated the skills way back when, especially as the general player base aged at a low-level category. Such parasitic design was always present, but worsened as RS2 aged. The introduction of new features that invalidated and replaced older systems, while leaving those old systems purposeless or impractical. A discussion better found with Josh Strife Hayes and myself, see reference 2. As always, the answer is either to 1. Simply have infinite resources, or 2. Strike a healthy balance when devoting development resources between new and reworked content. Where that healthy ratio lies between new to old is highly subjective and a world of debate unto itself, but it's certainly not a 20 to 80 ratio we've been running with these past 12 months. Of course, that brings us right back to the primary purpose of this post, firemaking. Again, I love the topic of new skills, and I think we're at a point in the game's lifespan where we could finally use our first, but simultaneously, I don't think the introduction of a new skill should come to the absolute exclusion of helping some of our old, suffering skills. Since we've seen a lot of detailed ideas for new skills already, this document is an appeal to the latter belief, making impactful changes to revitalize, or, in Firemaking's case, just vitalize, an older system that should have a stronger in-game presence. It is a skill, after all. I believe that designation deserves some respect. Section 3. Firemaking as a skill. The state of firemaking. It's great that firemaking is universally recognized as a skill in need of dire help, but the comment, "fix firemaking," is about as useful as demanding a fix for poverty. Rather, we'll need to actually identify specific problems and set goals before we can draw paths between the two. Part of this is understanding what a skill should be, both how skills have been traditionally defined, but also how some have evolved and become stronger over time. These next couple subsections will focus on the essential aspects of good skills, measuring firemaking against more well-founded designs, while also putting together achievable objectives with this overhaul. This will also double as a guide for analyzing other skills under a similarly critical lens and asking if they're accomplishing all that they should be. Skills as activities. A skill is defined by a central theme, a broad and unifying talent that a person or player can develop expertise in. Ranged is an umbrella for the various techniques of using physical weapons at a distance. Mining is a skill of acquiring ores and other precious minerals from the earth, and thieving encompasses a range of abilities for partaking in others' success. This theme is then expressed in a spread of activities with unique gameplay mechanics, varying in level of complexity, accessibility, effort, and rewards. A strong skill will take its theme and express it in ways that appeal to different audiences, including being taken to its logical extremes and through creative twists. Hunter is an example of a skill with strong variety and fair appeal in terms of training. Not only do you have a large number of simple and accessible activities that represent the idea of hunting at its most basic level, like bird snaring, box trapping, butterfly netting, pitfall trapping, and net trapping, but you also have activities that branch out to higher levels of complexity and completely different styles of gameplay. Drift net fishing, aerial fishing, maniacal monkeys, impling hunting, and herbivore all adapt Hunter's central theme to a wider spread of mechanics, levels of intensity, and rewards. Balancing a skill with activities of lighter intensity, as well as those requiring greater involvement, usually with better XP and rewards, helps maintain Hunter's appeal for most players. Not many skills reach Hunter's level of variety in activities, although some, like Agility's Hallowed Sepulchre, have individual activities that are arguably more creative and dynamic than what Hunter offers. In terms of activities, firemaking isn't in the worst position, though it would be generous to call some of these items activities. Standard firemaking, including line firemaking, is a very basic and accessible activity which grants high XP rates, while being moderately intense. Pyre ships and Dorgish Khan light orbs offer a small bit of variety, but both are extremely niche in function and difficult to compare to other options. Shades of Morton, especially post-rework, offers a decent low-level alternative to regular firemaking loops with pyre logs. And finally, of course, Winter Toad is an absolute monstrosity in terms of engagement, offering strong XP rates, low to moderate intensity, and decent rewards. Altogether, firemaking has a small spread of activities for appealing to different playstyles, and is rarely the subject of complaint when it comes to training, which also probably has to do with it being quite fast. If there is a niche for firemaking that still isn't fulfilled, it would be a high-intensity, high-engagement activity which tests players' mechanical limits, but I think most would agree that this isn't a huge priority. Skills as functions. When evaluating a skill, it's essential to discuss how it serves the wider world. What's the skill's purpose, its endgame? What functional niche does it attempt to fill, and does it fill it well? Players often request that a skill, whether a current one or new suggestion, be given valuable rewards. I agree, but I'd also like to make the distinction between skill-specific reward styles of functions and payments. Payments are items or benefits granted by an activity, but unrelated to the nature of the activity itself, whereas a function is more innate, a direct logical result of performing that activity. In this paradigm, supply crates granting seeds, herbs, logs, fish, and so on are payments for helping with winter toad, whereas the ability to cook on an open fire is a basic function of firemaking. An easy way to separate the two is to determine how you're being rewarded. If the reward for practicing a skill comes from a third party, or is tacked onto an activity without there being a strong and direct narrative connection, then it's a payment. If the reward for a skill is just the natural effect of having performed said activity, then it's a function. To better illustrate this difference, the Slayer reward shop would be a payment-style reward within Slayer, as it has little to do with the physical activity of slaying monsters, while the Abyssal Whip would be a function-style reward for killing an Abyssal Demon and ripping its spine out, which is somewhat gruesome to think of. Similarly, growing a redwood tree and chopping it for logs would be a function of firemaking and woodcutting, whereas being awarded a seed pack for being a good boy and following arbitrary directions is a form of payment. The reason I make this distinction, which won't always be as apparent as the examples I've given, is because skills at their most basic level tend to focus on rewarding players by functions and less so by payments. This leads to a more organic reward system that follows a logical through line for performing the given skill, while relying on payments to give a skill purpose can feel artificial, forced, and inappropriate to the skill's theme. Smithing rewards metal-based gear as a natural function of practicing the skill. If basic smithing didn't grant armor, but instead a smithing master paid you for your work in the form of fish, it wouldn't feel right, even if those fish came in ridiculous quantities, and therefore the activity was highly rewarding, or even the only way to acquire fish in-game, it still wouldn't fit smithing like a proper function. Sure, a system of contracts or payments is fine to have, but exercising a skill should be rewarded primarily by following its natural function, and not relying on artificial payments to give it purpose. So, coming back to firemaking, what functions is it serving? Primarily, firemaking is used to make fires for cooking and to give light for dark caves. Again, these are natural functions of wielding fire and therefore perfectly reasonable rewards for a skill about making fires, but it's not a very valuable niche. Being able to cook on fires is almost completely overshadowed by ranges existing throughout the game world which provide lower burn rates and require no setup, and special ranges even take their benefits several steps further. If designing the game from the ground up, it would make perfect sense if ranges needed to be lit with firemaking before use, and for the quality of cooking or burn rates to be dependent on the tier of log used. That would make firemaking nearly essential, but alas, such a fundamental change would be too drastic in the modern day. Light sources aren't much more relevant, helping players avoid some damage and navigate through a limited set of dark environments. Unfortunately, such caves are far and few between, used infrequently or only during quests. Balloons are also a unique function of firemaking, but they're generally so inconvenient and poorly placed that their functional niche in transportation fails to compete. And again, while Shades of Morton and Wintertoad have a plethora of rewards that certainly help the overall reward value of firemaking, they're more like arbitrarily decided payments than organic functions in the skill. They feel more like rewards from minigames and less so from the skill itself. It's also worth pointing out that quest requirements or other one-time use features aren't great in terms of giving a skill function. Being relevant only once and forgotten quickly after doesn't lend much to giving a skill a strong sense of purpose. The last topic I'd like to bring up concerning skills is their role as integrators, ingraining themselves across the game in both geographical and mechanical landscapes. Skills in real life are defined by their progression in relation to people. Whether you have a certain skill, and to what height you've achieved it, is dependent on your methods and duration of practice, not on where you are or what you're doing at a given moment. If you've learned to play the trumpet, that skill doesn't suddenly disappear when you put your trumpet away. Sure, you can no longer practice that skill without the appropriate tool, but the skill still remains with you. OSRS generally treats its skills the same. It runs on the philosophy of, if you have the right tools, you can practice your skills almost anywhere across the game. Skills aren't reserved only for niche scenarios, or cornered at one end of the game world, barring potentially malicious or detrimental gameplay, like restricting firemaking in certain mini-games. Anvils and furnaces allow smithing to be performed in many cities and towns. Trees exist everywhere for the purpose of woodcutting, and burying bones or prayer can be accomplished, perhaps a little too generously. Jagex, it's concerning that I can bury bones on the upper floors of buildings. Therefore, as we discuss giving firemaking strong functions, we'll want these functions to be as broadly spanning as possible rather than, say, relegating them to only working in the specific context of a minigame. Mechanical integration can be much trickier to establish. Creating new systems that are mechanically isolated from or ignorant to the rest of the game can quickly lead to parasitic design, where multiple simultaneous systems are competing for control and actively take away from each other. I know that the sentiment of the day is moving towards power creep good, but unregulated change and power creep that actively disregards previous systems leads to the mechanical and balancing mess RS2 is in during its final days. Power creep is fine so long as it's controlled, smart, respectful, and adds layers to the game rather than cutting it up to make space. So when trying to mechanically integrate a firemaking overhaul, we want to be conscious of the systems it might be overlapping. Sure, we could make it so that fires could just cook all types of foods, and also decrease burn rates by 50%, but that would come at the cost of any special range awarded through other efforts becoming completely irrelevant. I'd much rather approach this topic with a little more respect and nuance. Section 4. Objectives. Based on our review above, let's now clearly outline our objectives for the rest of this discussion. Number 1. Purposeful. In other words, give firemaking better rewards, focusing on new, meaningful functions. Number 2. Integrated. Ensure that firemaking's new functions integrate well into the game world and mechanics. Number 3. Constructive. As a soft overhaul, provide new features without destroying or disrespecting old systems and mechanics. Number 4. Fresh. Create new ideas that are genuinely interesting and increase the skill's activity variety. Now let's move on to the actual features of today. Feature 1. Fire pits, spit roasting, and smoked food. Introduction. If firemaking's original function was to provide a mobile base for cooking, then it's given a pretty terrible performance. Well, maybe that's not entirely fair, but with ranges having better burn rates and found aplenty throughout the world, banks with extremely close proximity to ranges and permanent fires, and special ranges with even stronger capabilities, firemaking is left with an extremely small niche, especially for a skill. Even worse, fires are heavily limited on the types of food that can be cooked on them, being mostly restricted to meats and fish. While the easy route might be to make more foods cookable on a fire and give them better burn rates, perhaps even scaling with firemaking level or tier of logs, I prefer to give firemaking its own identity, over just X but better. Fire pits. First off, our new fire pits are not to be confused with the one-time use fire pits that serve as rewards from making friends with my arm. I liken such fires to beacons more than anything else. Rather, these are a new method of firemaking with the primary goal of giving the skill a stronger function while strengthening its relationship with cooking. Players can make fire pits anywhere in the game world where regular fires are permitted, serving as special temporary cooking stations with new and exclusive cooking mechanics and techniques. To create a fire pit, players will need a tinderbox, spade, and logs. Similar to regular fires, the higher one's firemaking level, the faster a fire pit is created. The quality of the fire pit is important for cooking and determining how fast it burns out, which is dependent on the tier of logs used in the making. Like regular fires, Fire pits have a limited lifespan before burning out, but they run on more predictable timers and give a visual indicator when burning low. At any time, any player can use another set of logs, which must be the same variety as the fire pit, to reset the timer. Once burned out, they drop regular ashes. Fire pits can be used for either spit roasting or smoking, new cooking techniques that can't be used elsewhere. Note that creating a fire pit requires having the relevant firemaking level, but using it only requires the food-appropriate cooking level. You can use other players' fire pits, even if you don't have the right firemaking level. Spit roasting overhaul. You may not know that spit roasting already exists in-game for cooking raw bird meat, raw beast meat from kebabs, chompy, and rabbits. Your lack of knowledge is quite forgivable, however, as the activity requires an iron spit, an extra step skewering the meat, and its products are absolutely useless in comparison to all the much stronger food out there. Therefore, today's proposal for fire pits will also include throwing out the old method of spit roasting and instead introducing a new, entirely reworked version. Spit roasting requires using an iron spit on a fire pit to create a roasting pit, and right-clicking Cook to open up the roasting pit interface. Unlike regular fires, cooking with fire pits is a slower, less hands-on process. Players store uncooked food, either meats or fish, in fire pits and let them cook on their own, each batch of food taking 45 seconds to cook no matter the type of food or size of the batch. Spit roasting is not an active process. During that time, players can perform other activities as they see fit. After the batch is finished, players can collect their finished food and begin the next batch. Spit roasting grants a few marked benefits over other forms of cooking. It maintains the same burn rates as regular ranges, and while much slower than cooking on a range, its passive approach gives players the freedom to perform other simultaneous activities, skilling, combat, and so on, appealing both to those efficiency-scape addicts and chill bank standers. And, while still tightly restricted in the types of food it can cook, each piece of food has a chance of becoming a roasted variant instead of a regular cooked version, offering a unique bonus over other foods. Most meats and fish can be spit roasted and therefore have roasted variants, which, in addition to their regular healing, also heal an additional 5 hit points, but only when you're at 10% or less of your maximum hit points. A few examples of new roasted foods are indicated here. Smoking. Another unique feature of fire pits is the ability to smoke certain foods as another new cooking technique. Instead of using an iron spit on a fire pit to create a roasting pit, using an iron grate, made with a smithing skill, will create a smoking pit. Any uncooked meat or fish can be smoked, and, contrary to roasting, smoking is much more delicate, and its mechanics are much more involved. Right-clicking smoke on a smoking pit will bring up the smoking interface, allowing you to store and simultaneously cook a number of foods depending on the tier of fire. Once you're ready to begin, selecting Start will launch the activity. Smoking is primarily interface-based, requiring some speed and tact as you constantly moderate the state of your food, rotating and swapping them to slots of the appropriate heat level, stashing a piece of food to preserve its progress, and adjusting the height of the grill to apply a global heat change. Any food you smoke requires the regular cooking level, while burn rates are dependent on your ability to play the smoking activity instead of your level. Once satisfied with the state of all the food on the grill, you can end to remove them all simultaneously. The food is then placed in your inventory appropriately, whether they are in cooked, raw, smoked, or burnt form. Smoked food heals about half that of their regular cooked counterparts, but causes no delay to a player's next attack. They can be eaten while simultaneously attacking. However, they do force a 6-tick delay before another piece of food or drink can be consumed. Practical application. The first notable aspect of fire pits is that they provide an opportunity to build on firemaking without disrupting the firemaking that folks are already familiar with. Basic fires are currently used for cooking food in the field or creating lines for XP, both requiring very minimal prep, thought, or effort, and it's probably best we keep it that way. Sure, we could completely overhaul firemaking from the ground up, but it would likely cause more frustration than necessary. You can probably imagine that if fires lasted longer based on logs burned, it'd make it pretty frustrating for line firemaking. If normal fires take 1 to 2 minutes to turn to ashes, it'd take ages for a line of redwood fires to burn out, so you could use that space again. So, fire pits are not a training method, but a function in the form of a unique cooking station, and whose effects can't be found outside of firemaking. The activities of roasting and smoking are pretty self-explanatory. Roasting is a really chill way to train cooking, or intensive multitasking, while smoking provides a shorter, more intense minigame-like event. While normally as effective as regular cooked foods, roasted variants push for people to risk themselves. In low-intensity scenarios like thieving or combat against basic monsters, they're probably quite safe to use at low HP and restore higher HP per inventory slot. In high-intensity scenarios, they're much riskier, more like a panic food when you drop to HP levels you shouldn't be at. It's hard to predict exactly how the additional healing might play out, and almost definitely would need to be tweaked. Smoked variants are quite different, and probably even more contentious. Using them well could be life-saving if you're mid-spec and need to react to a sudden stroke of vengeance, but they aren't great healing and simultaneously leave you vulnerable to a quick follow-up. Being unable to eat or drink for 6 ticks might end instead of save you, or possibly confirm an already inevitable death. Feature 2. Slash and Burn. Introduction. In the real world, slash and burn is an ancient agricultural technique, still employed today, where farmers slash apart the vegetation of an area before burning it to ash, creating a large swath of extremely fertile land. In OSRS, slash and burn will offer some small added bonuses to your everyday farming runs if you're willing to sacrifice extra time and put in the extra effort. Design-wise, it's a very simple means of bonding farming and firemaking closer through a very basic function, one that can be applied almost anywhere you can practice farming. Mechanics. Slash and burn can be performed on any fully grown crop, including ones you've stripped of resources with a tinderbox and firemaking level equal to the farming level of the crop. Right-clicking the crop and selecting burn, or using the tinderbox on it will initiate slash and burn, which plays the fire lighting animation and takes about 30 seconds to complete, or faster with higher firemaking level. Once burned away, player is granted extra farming and firemaking experience equal to 4 times the farming level of the crop, and the newly empty patch is automatically given a compost effect if below 50 firemaking, or super compost effect if 50 firemaking and above. For example, burning a palm tree patch at level 68 farming would provide 272 experience to firemaking and farming, and would automatically fertilize the new patch with super compost. Practical application. Now that we've covered the very simple mechanics of slash and burn, it also deserves looking at how it'll play out in practice. Due to the nature of the activity, there are a number of reasons why players won't want to slash and burn a crop. For some, the XP simply isn't worth the time, and crops with unpredictable yields, like herbs, are probably best fully harvested and left unburned. In other cases, slash and burn might just be the favorable alternative to paying local farmers to remove crops. While paying will be quite a bit faster, slash and burn also gives a nice chunk of firemaking and farming XP for fairly minimal effort. Players who are tight on cash to dump into farming or trying to train as fast as possible, a goal normally stumped by farming strict time restraints, might be willing to spend the extra effort. Finally, as a small thematic bonus, having an extra compost or super compost effect can help take down the costs of farming. Naturally, if players still want ultra compost, they may do so after the burning is complete. Feature 3. Bonfires. Introduction. The craft of fire is an old human tradition, crossing the boundaries of culture and time. Considering the medieval era, it was fundamental for providing light and warmth, and as a result became a symbol of comfort and restoration. Bonfires exemplified these aspects, being beacons of social activity, mirth, renewal, celebration, and spiritual inspiration. They not only deserve a proper place in OSRS, but can be used to build firemaking a stronger foundation and open more doors for future uses. Many of you are probably familiar with the bonfires of RS3, so I'd like to be clear from the outset. Despite the same name, this iteration of bonfires for old school will function quite differently. It's best to approach these bonfires with a clean slate, as it won't be acting as a training method here, but rather a rewarding function for high firemaking and mini social hubs. Building and resting. Bonfires are made quite simply, using logs on any existing fire, including those made by other players, with a tinderbox in one's inventory will turn it into a bonfire. Similar to fire pits, the type of bonfire created is dependent on the type of logs added. For example, adding oak logs to a fire will turn it into an oak bonfire, and adding redwood logs will create a redwood bonfire. Again, similar to fire pits, instead of the normal 1 to 2 minute timer for the fire to burn out, bonfires last longer and run on more consistent timers, which can be reset by anyone adding another of the same type of logs. By right-clicking Rest at a bonfire, players are granted various bonuses depending on the bonfire's tier, but these effects require at least 5 seconds of resting to activate as the player settles down. Resting and its associated benefits are interrupted by combat or any other action besides cooking. Any player can gain the benefits of resting at a bonfire regardless of who made it. Resting benefits. It's probably best just to look at this table as explain each benefit. Burn chance reduction. Reduces the chance of burning food to equal that of a regular range. Run restore bonus. Restores run energy at a rate dependent on agility level. At level 1 agility, it's approximately 4 times faster than normal, while at 99 agility, will restore it up to 8 times regular speed. Stats/HP restore. Restores all stats except prayer at a 3 times rate. This effect cannot stack with the regen bracelet, but will stack with rapid heal or the hit points cape. Prayer boosts. Restores prayer at a very slow rate and prevents prayer points from draining. Prayers can be used without cost while resting. Special attack regen. Restores special attack at double the normal rate. Practical application. Just reading the above effects probably sets off a few alarm bells in terms of balance. Of course, all numbers are subject to change, but it also must be recognized that bonfires, while potentially powerful, require a level of commitment that'll probably leave them out of most combat scenarios. First off, bonfires require a minimum of 3 inventory spaces, 1 for a tinderbox and 2 for logs, assuming you're only planning to use a single bonfire, which will only burn for 5 minutes if the best logs are used. Additionally, needing to wait 5 seconds at a bonfire before the full effects of resting can kick in means that it won't be tick abusable and requires some actual downtime to be used at all, as it will be interrupted by combat or other activity. Players will often need to determine if it's just more worth it to teleport to their house for a pool refreshment versus relying on a bonfire. So what's their intended niche? Traveling, especially for lower levels, can be a real pain due to run energy constraints. However, by carrying an axe and tinderbox, you'll easily be able to whip up a quick bonfire using Gillenor's many trees to keep going. Group bosses and dangerous activities can make much more efficient use of bonfires, as it only requires one participant to bring the relevant supplies for everyone to benefit. The restoration boosts are nice, but the prayer preservation ability is also handy for leaving prayers up for free in anticipation of an attack. It might be helpful for long trips, especially where teleport access is limited. Getting some restoration between Slayer or boss kills might be cheaper or faster than making constant bank runs. The mechanics I've detailed might not fill their intended niche as well, or might absolutely dominate the game. I can't tell here sitting in my armchair without proper development or testing tools, which is to say, if something like this is considered, please test it before release. You'll also likely notice that there's no type of bonfire that includes all possible boosts. Similarly, there are other potential boosts that didn't make the cut, like the HP boost of RS3's bonfires. I decided to keep the number of different possible boosts down to make bonfires accessible and easy to understand, while still presenting some level of choice and planning even at the highest levels, rather than one bonfire beats all. These features can be debated and relooked at if similar bonfires were ever formally proposed for old school. Feature 4. Night of the Wilderness. Introduction. Night of the Wilderness is a new dangerous minigame set in an instanced, non-PvP version of the wilderness. Abbot Langley of Edgeville Monastery has assigned Brother Warwick to arrange rescue missions for lost adventurers who are trapped out during the wilderness's deadly night. Being an adventurer yourself, Brother Warwick could use your help and skills, especially those relating to firemaking, as the dark night of the wilderness is not one to be trifled with. Night of the Wilderness is for players looking for high-intensity, mechanically challenging gameplay. and those who succeed in retrieving the lost adventurer will find some of the best firemaking XP rates in the game and a few other unique rewards. Starting out, start Night of the Wilderness by speaking to Brother Warwick, who set up a small tent and campfire just northwest of Edgeful Monastery. He'll introduce players to the basic premise of the minigame and help arrange a party of up to 4 players. While it is performable solo, it is much more efficient to play as a full group. Night of the Wilderness requires 50 firemaking to play, and at least one team member needs 50 herblore. Having higher levels in both skills doesn't help any further, but will increase how much XP is gained at the end. Once ready to go, players enter an instance consisting of 3x3 wilderness chunks, one of 4 random options. The basics. With the goal of finding the lost adventurer, the team spawns in the middle of the instance, the 3x3 wilderness chunks, in the camp. The camp contains some necessary components, including a large bonfire and bundles of kindling for making campfires. Players are also given a tinderbox and wieldable torch, the main weapons against the dangers of the wilderness night. Instead of following regular combat conventions, players' health is indicated by their terror meter, and must prevent it from reaching 100%. Terror passively increases or decreases depending on the player's light source. At 100%, the player dies a dangerous death. They'll be isolated in a minigame waiting room till the activity is over. A dead player still benefits from the rest of the team succeeding, or they can quit early with no possibility of reward. Light sources come in 4 categories. None. Having no active light source quickly fills the terror meter. Torches. Players are given a torch at the start, which acts as a weak light source. Having just the torch active will cause terror to increase at a moderate rate. A box of infinite torches can be found within the camp. Campfires. Players can build campfires wherever, using kindling bundles found in the camp. They provide significant light and slowly reduce terror levels. The bonfire. The main camp contains a singular bonfire, which rapidly reduces terror. The bonfire weakens as the minigame progresses. Night of the Wilderness occurs in 3 phases, which we'll break down in detail. Phase 1, Rescue. Players spread out from the camp in search of the lost adventurer. Upon finding him, they'll need to slowly help him back to the camp. A few night terrors attack both players and lost adventurer, but can be fended off relatively easily. Phase 2 is Defend. The lost adventurer needs some time and help to regain his strength before the journey home. The main camp comes under attack by more night terrors, forcing players to make a desperate defense. Phase 3 is Escape. The incorporeal beast rises, consuming the camp's bonfire. The players must escape with the lost adventurer to the map edge. To go more in depth, Phase 1, Rescue. After spawning the camp with a few supplies and getting their bearings, players must rush to find the lost adventurer, who's typically located close to the edges of the map. Having stamina potions is very helpful, as well as having a full 4-player party to make searching go faster. Monitoring terror level is essential. While keeping one torch alight will slow terror's passive increase while allowing players to keep highly mobile, they'll likely need to stop at the camp's bonfire at some point to actually restore terror to more manageable levels. Making a quick campfire using kindling bundles is a good way to restore terror while away from the camp, but its effects are much weaker than that of the camp bonfire. In the meantime, a couple basic night terrors may attempt to attack you here and there. First we have the Terror Skull, a floating visage that attacks from a great distance. They're slow and easy to outrun, but dish out powerful attacks. If players come near, the Terror Skull will attempt to back off, forfeiting their normal attack cycles, but making them much more annoying to pin down in melee. A lit torch can be thrown at them from moderate distance to instantly destroy them, but then the torch is lost entirely. The Night Hounds. Night Hounds are fast moving, able to catch up with running players, but their melee attacks only deal small levels of terror. They're easy to slay with a hit from a lit torch, but doing so will extinguish the torch and require relighting. Nightcrawlers. Nightcrawlers are large beasts that move at walk speed, but are immune to attacks with a torch. Nightcrawlers deal devastating melee attacks if they get up close. If lured into campfires or the camp's bonfire, they'll be momentarily stunned, and if unable to attack for too long, the Nightcrawler will dissipate away on its own. Once the lost adventurer is found, players must slowly guide him back to the camp. He travels quite slowly, and in the meantime, the attacks from night terrors will increase in frequency. The Lost Adventurer has his own terror meter, and tends to be targeted more often than players, but can be given a torch of his own and be made to sit at a temporary campfire to reduce terror on the way back to the camp. If the Lost Adventurer reaches 100% terror at any point during the minigame, the game is over. Phase 2. Defend. Once the Lost Adventurer is settled back in the camp by the bonfire, he'll need his wounds tended and to be fed. In the meantime, night terror attacks become very frequent, and the bonfire will start to fade under the pressure, weakening its restoration effects. Food is stored in the camp's food crate. It can be easily picked up and supplied to the Lost Adventurer, but will take some time to eat before the next piece of food can be given. Herb poultices need to be made using herbs that start spawning some distance from the camp, requiring 50 herb lore. Players will need to balance their priorities between team members, simultaneously gathering herbs and converting them to herb poultices for use on the Lost Adventurer, feeding him at regular intervals, and defending him from night terror attacks, all the while keeping their own terror levels in check. Additionally, 2 new night terrors appear. The Winged Raptor. Large winged beasts which attempt to swoop in and pick up easy targets. If one manages to reach a player, they'll be teleported a distance away and receive a large hit in terror. They can be defeated by throwing a lit torch, but any thrown torch is lost. The Jester. The Jester appears unexpectedly, teleporting frequently between locations and players. It attacks with melee, dealing moderate levels of terror, while also stunning players and rendering them unable to act for a short period of time. The Jester can be defeated by 3 melee hits with a lit torch, which may require some coordination from players to pull off efficiently. Phase 3. Escape. Once the Lost Adventurer has had his wounds bound and is fully fed, Phase 3 begins. He'll start walking towards the nearest edge of the map, and, once there, the minigame is won and players receive their rewards. Players must defend him as he makes his journey, keeping his terror and their own in check. The frequency of attacks from the other 5 night terrors continue as the players escort the Lost Adventurer away, but the main threat arrives as well, the Incorporeal Beast. The Incorporeal Beast is a spiritual aspect of the Corporeal Beast, its spirit freed from the cave during the long wilderness nights. It cannot be defeated. Upon entry, it immediately consumes the camp bonfire, initiating the rush to escape the wilderness with the Lost Adventurer. The Incorporeal Beast has several mechanics to work around. Consume. If the Incorporeal Beast, at any point, comes into melee range of either a player or the Lost Adventurer, they are immediately consumed and slain. Lighting a campfire with a bundle of kindling will momentarily slow it down, taking its time to consume the campfire. Teleport. If the Incorporeal Beast is ever too far away from the Lost Adventurer, it'll teleport close nearby. Dark Core. The Incorporeal Beast sends out multiple Dark Cores as a ranged attack, which deal small terror and immediately extinguish active torches. If the players can get the Lost Adventurer safely to the map edge, they are victorious and the minigame ends. Rewards. The primary reward from Night of the Wilderness is Firemaking XP, acting as a high-intensity firemaking training method with relatively minimal costs. All experience scales with level. Once players are confident with the minigame and able to perform it efficiently, they should be able to reach about 250k XP per hour at level 50 firemaking and about 560k XP per hour at 99. The current best rates are 519k XP per hour from redwood logs, while Winter Toad maxes out at 320k XP per hour, according to the wiki. Any player with 50 herblore can also expect around 20k herblore XP per hour at level 50, up to 40k XP per hour at level 99. Aside from that, there are a few other rewards besides experience that might attract some players. Players roll once on the drop table after every minigame completion, and each is a fairly rare drop. First we have the Eternal Lantern, a light source equipable in the ammunition slot to hang by your side. It provides +1 prayer, and can be used to light fires like a tinderbox. Uniquely, while equipped, the Eternal Lantern also opens up a left-click light option on logs in the inventory, reducing the intensity of line firemaking. We also have the Boots of Ember, which provide combat stats comparable to rune boots, Whenever the player is frozen by an ice spell, they immediately restore 15% special attack. We also have the Incorporeal Gloves, which increases the attack speed of shadow spells by 1 tick, and grants a chance of lowering the target's attack level by 30%, up from 15%. Finally, we have the Spectral Boots. Note the lack of image for this unique. These boots have no visible model, causing the player to look like a spooky ghost or a levitating amputee. Why'd I write that? As a result, these are the new best in slot boots despite having no stats whatsoever. Practical application. So now that we've covered Night of the Wilderness, let's examine what it's actually attempting to do and study how that might play out in game. First off, Night of the Wilderness is primarily a high-intensity training method, a gap that Firemaking hasn't really filled. Hallowed Sepulchre provided an incredible outlet for training agility that made the skill more interesting, skill-based, gave it an appealing learning curve and progression scheme, and provided variety. The closest Firemaking has to something similar is line Firemaking, which, while moderately intense, isn't particularly stimulating. Of course, we should be asking, Firemaking is generally a pretty fast skill, so does it really need another training method? Not really, but if it did get such attention, I feel that Night of the Wilderness would fill that gap rather well. Plus it was really fun to ideate and put together. Yes, at times I do have a soul, and create simply because I enjoy creating. The background and mechanics of Night of the Wilderness were all built around keeping players engaged, and having to make difficult decisions about priorities and resource consumption. The idea of wilderness survival outside of Bucane seemed a great theme to run with, and the concept of using Firemaking for light as a weapon against the terrors of the night sounded like good intense fun. The 3 phases are built to slowly warm players to the general mechanics of the minigame while keeping the players on their feet, moving around, and pushing them about with dynamic objectives. Focusing those objectives around someone to protect, the lost adventure, felt thematically appropriate, and again, keeps players reassessing priorities on the fly and needing to be aware of multiple simultaneous issues: their own terror, their teammates' terror, that of the lost adventure, and reaching the end of the phase. In terms of rewards, I've left Night of the Wilderness rather thin on uniques due to it intending to be a competitive training method and not a moneymaker, reaching just above the current best XP rates due to the extra effort and practice required. Going back to our design philosophy, these rewards are quite distinctly payments, not functions. As such, Night of the Wilderness alone wouldn't make for a very good Firemaking overhaul. It's not helping Firemaking work better at the basic level of a skill, just adding some odd other rewards on top, and providing a strong training method, so I won't belabor the rewards I've proposed. Their ideas to be accepted, modified, or thrown out entirely as seen fit. Back to Ashes. That's pretty much all I have today. A brief discussion to add to the new versus reworked content debate, a history and study of what a skill should accomplish, and 4 features that I believe would help form Firemaking from its current empty shell into a fully fledged, practical, and thematic skill. If we're ever to discuss bringing an old forgotten skill into the modern age, Firemaking is the most deserving candidate, after years of mockery and abandonment. At such a time, I'd love to give Firemaking a true old school treatment, respecting the past while revitalizing it for the future. References are in the comments as always, but an extra special thanks to 117scape, whose work on the HD RuneLight plugin has enhanced the visual quality of this post by 117 times. Happy to hear all your thoughts in the comments. I hope you all enjoy your day, and as usual, thanks for watching. Hey, so that's the formal end of the presentation. You can go switch over to something more interesting now, because we're about to get to me, and that's not entirely interesting. So, yeah, I just want to quickly talk about the video and the presentation as a whole. I was really happy this time around with the image post. That is a point of pride for me, a serious point of pride. I feel like I really innovated, I felt like the standard of writing was pretty okay. And part of me wanted to bring that out to more people, and that's come about as me creating this sort of read-through here. And originally that was all that it was planned to be, just a simple read-through of the document as I scrolled through. Obviously it's turned into something a bit more. It's kind of fully edited. That was only partially intentional. But you know, here we are. I'm glad I did it. I didn't mind doing it. It was kind of fun at points. But it took a lot of effort. I mean, I finished the actual post itself about a week and a half ago. Like, it was ready to go out. But I wanted to do this to try and just reach out to some more people, see if I get some more feedback. I like video essays. I love listening to video essays. I like making them less, and I figured, well, other people might like listening instead of reading, so why not try that? Yeah, but this past week and a half, I've put probably about 100 hours or so into just this video here, which is pretty ridiculous. If that sounds crazy, it sounds just as crazy to me. Between work and all that, it's been pretty exhausting, and part of that's just my fault, me planning and just wanting to get this out there. The post is finished. I would have posted it a week ago if things were completely my way. Yeah, but I just wanted to branch out a bit. Yeah, so I guess where I'm going with this is that if you stick around, don't expect things quite of this video caliber. It's an amateur's work, and I think that's clearly reflected in the product that you've just witnessed. I do hope that the quality increases if I keep doing this sort of video editing business. Not something I'm the most interested in, but if people really like it, you know, that I can accommodate that. It's not a big deal. Just don't expect quite as much effort to be put into the videos, as it's really not my priority. I like my pen and paper. I like my writing. That's the fun part for me. Even some of the images on the image, the little diagrams and tables and 3D models, that's not always the fun part for me. So you can imagine, you know, that times 30 frames a second or whatever the heck it is, less fun. Not bad, just less. So yeah, that's about all I really have to say on that. I really do hope you have a good day. If you've listened all the way here, don't know what you're doing. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say on that. Have a good one.